evening. I'm Anne-Marie Scottsoff, and we start here at 6 with this, a search for answers. After this prominent local musical artist is killed, gunned down overnight on the east side of Indianapolis.
He named his biggest song Hardly Breathe. 9 million people streamed it and never caught what he was actually saying, that the life he was living was already squeezing the air out of him. In the lyrics, he rapped about men who got killed for owing money they didn't have. He wasn't being poetic. He was being precise. When police raided his crack house in 2023 and pulled him out of an attic window, they found a gold necklace around his neck that read, "Must obey bosses forever." He beat those charges in court. February 2025, he walked free. But there are things a courtroom can't acquit you of. Debts aren't charges. They don't get dropped. And according to unverified accounts circulating in Indianapolis, Eric Butler, Lil E, allegedly owed money to people far above the street level. People tied to the same Phoenix supply chain that had kept the Grundy operation running for years. In April 2026, someone shot him outside an auto repair shop on the east side and left him breathing. A warning. 60 days later, at 2:25 in the morning, they came back to South Franklin Road and collected. No arrests. No suspects named. No one talking. Just a man who rapped about hardly breathing, dying exactly the way he described, and a debt that the city of Indianapolis is still pretending it doesn't know anything about. Before we go any further, I need you to do something right now. If you believe that real stories deserve real attention, that the people this world forgets too quickly should at least have someone telling their truth, hit that like button, subscribe to 3 AM Files, and click the bell so you never miss a case. We don't do this for numbers. We do this because somebody has to. Now let's get into everything they're not saying about Lil E. To understand how Eric Butler ended up shot in a car at 2:25 in the morning with no one willing to talk about who did it or why, you have to go back to where this story really starts. Not June 19th. Not April. You have to go back to a city that has been eating its own for decades, and a criminal empire that left its fingerprints on everything that came after, even from inside a federal prison cell. Indianapolis doesn't get the kind of national attention that cities like Chicago or Detroit get when it comes to gang violence. But make no mistake, the east side of Indianapolis has been one of the most consistently dangerous urban corridors in the Midwest for years. And for a long time, the man whose name sat at the center of that violence was Richard Grundy III. Law enforcement called him the most dangerous drug kingpin the city had ever produced. Prosecutors said his organization flooded Indianapolis streets with marijuana, methamphetamine, heroin, and cocaine. At one point, Richard Grundy III was connected to as many as 10 murders. His operation wasn't a street corner hustle. It was a structured criminal enterprise with a supply line that stretched from Indianapolis all the way out to Phoenix, Arizona, where Mexican distributors kept the product moving east. Drug money went west. Meth and cocaine came back. It was a pipeline worth millions, and it ran like clockwork for years. Eric Butler was not on the edges of that organization. He was inside it, high-ranking, a shot caller, the kind of person who had authority, who controlled who came in and out, who answered to the bosses above him and gave orders to the people below. In 2015, he was among 11 people charged in connection with the violent crimes and murders tied to the Grundy operation. Those charges eventually collapsed. He walked away. But the streets remembered exactly who he was and exactly what role he had played. Then came 2018. Butler pleaded guilty to dealing in a narcotic drug and received a 10-year sentence with 4 years suspended. He served his time. He came home. And instead of stepping away from everything, he stepped right back in. Because here's something that almost never gets said plainly enough. When you are high-ranking inside a structure like the Grundy organization, you don't just get to retire. The organization doesn't issue exit packages. The debts, the obligations, the relationships, the expectations, they don't dissolve because you did a few years and came home with a new perspective. They're waiting for you when you get back. By 2023, with Richard Grundy serving life in federal prison, what remained of his organization was still operating. Still moving product. Still using the same east side locations that had always been the nerve center of the operation. And Eric Butler was still in the middle of it. In September of that year, Indiana State Police executed a search warrant on a house on East Washington Street, a property investigators believed was still tied to the Grundy network. When the SWAT team moved in, 14 people poured out of the building. Eric Butler took a different route. He went up, all the way to the attic. And then he came out of the attic window and was taken into custody right there on the roof like a man who had been through enough raids to know that fighting wasn't worth it, but running was always worth trying. When investigators searched him, they found marked by money in his pocket, the same cash a confidential informant had used to purchase crack cocaine from him days earlier. And around his neck, they found that gold necklace. Must obey bosses forever. Say those words slowly. Must obey bosses forever. In 2023, years after the king of that operation was locked away for the rest of his natural life, Eric Butler was still wearing that oath-like armor. Which tells you something that no court document can quite capture. He wasn't just still in the life. He still believed in the structure. He still had bosses. And they still had expectations. In February 2025, a jury found him not guilty on all charges from that raid. He walked out of that courtroom a free man. Again, the system had failed to hold him, for the second time in a major case. And for a moment, it looked like maybe Eric Butler had finally found the gap between who the law said he was and who the streets knew him to be. He still had music. He still had nearly 100,000 people streaming his catalog every month. Punisher was still an anthem in Indianapolis. Hardly Breathe still had 9 million views. There was still something to build toward. Here is where the story takes a turn that nobody in official channels will confirm, and that we are presenting as an unverified theory based on accounts circulating within Indianapolis, because you deserve to hear it, even if law enforcement isn't ready to say it out loud. People close to this case believe that by 2026, Eric Butler had a debt. Not a personal beef. Not a neighborhood dispute. A financial obligation that ran up the same supply chain that had connected the Grundy operation to Phoenix for years. When a structure like the Grundy organization loses its leader, the debts don't disappear with him. The people who were supplying the product, the people further up the chain, the people in Phoenix, the people connected to distribution networks that don't operate on handshakes and goodwill, those people still expect to be paid. And if the money stops moving, the conversation changes. Think about the geography of what happened next. April 2026. Eric Butler is shot outside an auto repair shop on the east side of Indianapolis. Not a random location. Auto repair shops in drug-adjacent criminal networks are meeting places. Transaction locations. The kind of spots where a conversation happens that's too serious to have anywhere else. He was shot there and he survived. And critically, no one was arrested for that shooting. Not one person. Which in the world Eric Butler moved through means one of two things. Either the people who did it were untouchable, or the people who did it were supposed to come back and finish. 60 days. That's how long he had between the first shot and the last one. 60 days to fix something that apparently could not be fixed. And this is the part of the story I want you to sit with, because it tells you everything about the psychological reality of the life Eric Butler was living. He knew someone had tried to kill him. He knew they hadn't finished. He stayed on the same streets, in the same area, within the same mile radius where both shootings would eventually happen. Why? There are 3 ways to read that, and none of them are comfortable. The first is that he genuinely believed he could resolve it. He had beaten everything before: murder charges, federal cases, SWAT raids, prison jury trials. He had survived things that would have destroyed most people, and every time he came out the other side. Maybe he believed this was just another situation his reputation and his relationships could navigate. The second possibility is darker. That leaving was never actually an option. In certain criminal structures, a debt to people above you isn't something you can just run from. You can't change your name and move to another city and start fresh when the people you owe have reach that extends past Indianapolis. Running might have felt more dangerous than staying. And then there's a third possibility that's the hardest one to say. Maybe Eric Butler was tired. His music catalog was called Hardly Breathe for a reason. His album was called Eric Butler vs. the State of Indiana for a reason. He had been fighting the law, the streets, the system himself for his entire adult life. 15 arrests, federal indictments, prison, acquittals, raids, and then right back to the same block, the same life, the same weight. Maybe by 2026, the exhaustion of surviving had become its own kind of trap. On June 19, 2026, at 2:25 in the morning, someone found Eric Butler sitting in a car on the 200 block of South Franklin Road, less than a mile from where they had already shot him once, and this time they made sure. He was transported to Ashkenazi Hospital with gunshot wounds and pronounced dead on arrival. The Marion County Coroner's Office identified him. The IMPD homicide unit opened a case. Detective Christina Friel was assigned. And as of tonight, no arrests. No named suspects. No confirmed motive. 2 shootings, same target, same area, and the city of Indianapolis has offered nothing but silence. The Indianapolis music community is grieving him in a way that doesn't fit neatly into the narrative of a former gang member and repeat offender. Because Lil E was also a real artist. He was a storyteller who gave his city something genuine, music that came from actual lived experience, not a carefully constructed image. Punisher made people feel seen. Hardly Breathe connected with 9 million listeners because it was honest in a way that most music isn't. He named his projects after his legal battles. He wore his life on his records. And the tragedy isn't just that he's gone. It's that he spent so much of his talent telling you exactly what was going to happen to him, and the world just streamed it. So here's what I want to leave you with tonight. If the debt theory is correct, if Eric Butler was killed because of money owed to people connected to a supply chain that ran from Indianapolis to Phoenix, then what you're looking at is not just one man's story. You're looking at the tail end of an empire that law enforcement celebrated putting away when they sentenced Richard Grundy to life in prison. They said the city was safer. They held press conferences. And 7 years later, the organization that Grundy built was still operating, still collecting, still enforcing, and still killing people who couldn't pay. Who gave the order? Was this about the debt, or was this about something older? Something from the 2015 charges, or the 2023 raid, or a loyalty that was tested and failed somewhere along the way? If someone in Indianapolis knows exactly what happened on South Franklin Road that night, and someone always knows, what does it tell you that they're still not talking? And what does it say about a world where a man can rap about barely breathing for years, and the only people who actually heard him were the ones who eventually made sure he couldn't? Drop your theory in the comments. Tell me what you think Eric Butler was really carrying in those last 60 days. Tell me if you think justice is coming for this case, or if this is another name that fades into the silence that Indianapolis keeps so well. And if this story hit you the way it hit me, please subscribe to 3AM Files and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Every view keeps a story alive. We'll be back at 3 a.m. when the world sleeps and the truth has nowhere left to hide.